Let's begin. We've got 4chan material for tonight that's genuinely disturbing. Threads that people share with regret. These stories are unfiltered and they're wrong. Like the video, subscribe, sound up, and we're in. It was September 2021, a Friday night, and I was walking east on Randolph toward a place called Avec, First Date. I'd met her on Hinge maybe 2 weeks earlier. We'd been texting, and she'd picked the restaurant. Small plates, dim lighting, the kind of spot you don't suggest yourself because you'd feel like you were trying too hard. I was nervous in the way you're nervous when you already know you like someone before you've actually met them. That's a stupid way to feel, but there it was. The weather was that Chicago thing where September pretends to be summer during the day and then turns on you around 7. I'd worn a wool coat over a button-down, dark green coat. My roommate had told me it looked grown up, which I took as a compliment even though I wasn't sure it was one. I was maybe 2 blocks from the restaurant walking past the parking garage on Peoria when someone said, "Hey, wait a second," from behind me. I turned. It was a guy, older than me, maybe 50, gray at the temples, wearing a wool overcoat himself, nicer than mine, and holding a phone in one hand like he'd just gotten off a call. He wasn't a bum, wasn't asking for anything. He looked like he worked in a building nearby and had stepped out for a smoke. My first thought was that he was going to ask for directions. I stopped and turned toward him, half polite, half guarded, the way you are with strangers in a city at night. He just looked at me for a second, not up and down like he was sizing me up for a fight, more like he was checking something. Then he said, "You going on a date?" I laughed a little because it was such a weird question, but I nodded. "Yeah, actually." "Thought so," he said. "Take that coat off for a second. It's wrinkled in the back. Pretty bad." He turned his phone camera around and held it up so I could see myself over his shoulder. I twisted to look. There was a big crease running diagonally across the back of the coat, right between the shoulder blades, like I'd been sitting on it folded in the Uber, which, thinking about it, I had. I'd been checking my phone the whole ride and bunched the tail of it under me without noticing. Under the streetlight, it looked ridiculous, like I'd slept in it. I felt my face get hot. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, okay, thanks." "Coffee shop across the street has a bathroom," he said. "Ask nice. They'll let you use it. Run some water over the wool. Hang it for 2 minutes on the hook. Should drop out." Then he just nodded at me once, put his phone back to his ear, and walked off in the other direction. He was talking to someone about a lease before he was even 10 feet away. I stood there on the sidewalk for a beat, half wondering if I'd hallucinated the whole thing. I did what he said. There was a Collectivo on the corner. I walked in, ordered a small drip I didn't want, asked for the bathroom key. The barista, a girl with a nose ring who did not care about my life at all, slid it across the counter without looking up. In the mirror, the crease was worse than I'd thought. It ran across my whole upper back. If I'd walked into that restaurant with it, she would have seen it the second I turned to hang my coat over the chair. She wouldn't have said anything. She would have just clocked it and filed it away with all the other little pieces of information you collect on a first date about whether this is a person who has their life together. I wet a paper towel, dabbed the wool, hung the coat on the back of the door. Drank half of the coffee I didn't want. When I put the coat back on and checked the mirror, the crease was gone. Not perfect, but gone. I got to Avec at 7:58. She got there at 8:02. Her name was Rachel. She was wearing a rust-colored sweater and had her hair up. She'd walked from the blue line and her cheeks were pink from the wind. She apologized for being late, and I told her she wasn't, and we got a spot at the bar because the wait for a table was 40 minutes and neither of us wanted to stand around. The date was good, really good. The kind of good where you look at the check and realize you've been there almost 3 hours. She laughed at my jokes, which is a low bar, but she also asked me real questions and listened to the answers, which is a higher one. We split the harissa chicken. She ordered a second glass of wine, and I ordered a second beer, and we walked outside at 11-something into a Chicago that felt about 10 degrees colder than it had been earlier. I walked her to the Blue Line stop at Clinton. She kissed me on the corner, quick, and said she'd text me. She did, from the train, before I was even home. That was September. By Thanksgiving, we were dating. By spring, I had a drawer at her place. That summer, we drove up to Door County with her parents, and I met her dad, who shook my hand too hard on purpose, and then laughed about it. I didn't tell her about the guy on Peoria for almost a year. I don't know why. Part of me was embarrassed about the coat. Part of me was worried that if I said out loud that a stranger had saved my night, it would sound like I was reaching for a story, making our thing more romantic than it was. I finally told her the following August. We were on her couch, drinking, and she was telling me about the outfit she'd almost worn that night. A dress she said made her look like a substitute teacher. She'd changed at the last minute, so I told her about the coat, about the guy stopping me, about the coffee shop and the paper towel. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, "Are you serious right now?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I would have noticed. I would have absolutely noticed." Would it have mattered? She thought about it. She actually thought about it, which I appreciated. Then she shrugged and said, "Probably not. Maybe. I don't know." "It might have." Then she started laughing, and I started laughing, and we spent the next hour trying to figure out who the guy was and why he'd stopped me. She was convinced he was some kind of guardian angel. I said he was probably just a guy going through a divorce who felt like doing a good deed. She said that was the least romantic version of the story, and I wasn't allowed to tell it that way at the wedding, which is how I ended up telling it at the wedding. We got married last October, back in Chicago, at a place off Fulton. When I got to the part about the guy on Peoria, I looked out at the room and thought, for a second, that maybe he was somehow in it. He wasn't. He was some man I'd talked to for maybe 30 seconds on a sidewalk in 2021, and I would not recognize him if he walked past me tomorrow. I think about him sometimes anyway, not a lot. Just when I'm putting on that same green coat, which I still have, and I check the back of it in the mirror before I leave the apartment. Every single time, without thinking about it. Rachel does it too, actually. She started doing it a couple months after I told her the story. She'll turn in front of the hallway mirror and look over her shoulder and smooth down the back of whatever she's wearing. I've never asked her about it, and she's never mentioned it. Some nights, I wonder what he saw when he looked at me, whether it was really just the coat, or whether somebody did something like that for him once, and he was just passing it on. I hope so. That's really all I've got. The pattern showed up on a Tuesday in a spreadsheet I almost didn't open. I work in claims analytics for a mid-size health insurer in Atlanta. Sandy Springs technically, glass building off Perimeter Center, 3rd floor, cubicle by the window that never opened. In April 2022, most of us were still hybrid, so the office was half empty most days, and the air had that recycled taste, like someone was slowly draining oxygen out of the vents. My job wasn't glamorous. I ran variance reports on procedure codes. When a spinal fusion in one zip code cost 40% more than the same procedure a mile away, I flagged it. When a clinic billed for more hours than a human can physically work, I flagged it. Boring, mostly. Comforting, in a way. Numbers don't lie unless someone teaches them to. The thing that started it was a name I saw twice. I was pulling a quarterly report on orthopedic referrals across Metro Atlanta, nothing special. And a patient ID showed up on my screen going from a general practitioner in Marietta to a pain specialist in Buckhead, then to an imaging center in Dunwoody, then to a surgeon back in Marietta. Full loop, 6 weeks, $22,000 in billing. Not by itself weird, that's how referrals work sometimes, but the surgeon's name pinged something. I'd seen it that morning, on a totally different patient, coming out of a totally different practice, same loop shape, different people, different diagnoses, same 4 provider IDs. I pulled both patient charts side by side and just looked at them for a minute, then I ran the query wider. I told myself I was killing time before lunch. That part was true. What wasn't true was the story I gave myself about why my hands were a little cold on the keyboard. I already knew what I was looking at. I just wasn't ready to name it. By the end of the day, I had 8 provider IDs, not 4. 8. 2 GPs, a pain specialist, a chiropractor with a suspicious billing pattern, 2 imaging centers under different LLCs but the same registered agent, and 2 surgeons, all within a 50-mile radius. Every one of them had sent patients to every other one at least twice in the past 18 months. Some pairs had passed the same patients back and forth like a hot potato. The procedures were always the ones with the fat reimbursements. MR is with contrast, facet injections, nerve conduction studies, diagnostic arthroscopies that never seemed to lead anywhere. I stayed late that first night, ordered a salad from the place on the ground floor that closed at 7, and ate it at my desk while the cleaning crew moved through the hall. A woman named Bernice always stopped by my cube around 8:15 to empty the bin under my desk. That night, she just nodded at me and kept moving. I remember the sound of her cart, the little squeak of one wheel, going past twice. I built a graph, not fancy, just a Python script and networks because that's what I had. Every provider a node, every referral an edge weighted by dollars. I ran it, and the shape that came out on my screen looked like a wheel, or a spider web, if you wanted to be dramatic about it. But wheels are more honest, perfectly balanced. Every doctor received from every other doctor. Every one of them paid, in a sense, by sending business back. No single provider was outlier enough to trip an audit on their own. That was the elegant part. And that was what got me. Each doctor's referral pattern, viewed alone, sat inside a normal range. The pain specialist referred out about as often as any pain specialist does. The surgeons operated on a normal number of patients. The imaging centers imaged a lot of people, sure, but they were imaging centers. Any one of them, our system would clear, in a stack. Together, they were a machine. I didn't sleep great that week. Not because I was scared, It was more like a puzzle you can't put down, and every time you close your eyes, you see the piece you missed. I kept getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning to check something on my laptop. Once I opened the fridge and stood there for a full minute before I remembered I wasn't hungry. The part that took the longest wasn't finding the pattern, it was proving it wasn't coincidence. I pulled the patient outcomes. That's when it got worse. A woman in her 60s had received 4 MREs of the same knee in 14 months. Different centers, different orderings, same knee. A guy in his 40s had done 2 rounds of nerve conduction studies within 90 days, once on the left arm, once on the right, both times with the same specialist. He'd later had a diagnostic arthroscopy that concluded, and I'm reading from the notes, no significant findings. Continue conservative management. $12,000 for that sentence. Multiply that by hundreds of patients over 18 months. I ran the totals across the 8 providers, cross-referenced only through overlapping patients, $4.1 million. And that was just the paid claims I could see through our carrier. If they had other insurers running the same play, it was more. Probably a lot more. I called my manager on a Thursday, told him I wanted to walk him through something before I formalized it. His name was Doug, and Doug was a decent guy who mostly wanted to leave at 5. He came over, looked at my screen for maybe 2 minutes, and said, "Send that to legal, right now. Don't email anyone else. Don't put it in Slack." Then he walked back to his desk, and I watched him pick up his desk phone and dial an extension I didn't recognize. I want to say I felt vindicated. Honestly, I mostly felt tired. I put the whole thing in a memo, 22 pages, graph, provider IDs, patient IDs, anonymized to internal codes, dollar amounts, timeline. I attached a short legal framing at the end, careful language, nothing accusatory, something about how the individual conduct of each provider might fall within regulatory tolerance, but in aggregate, the referral topology and financial flow pattern met the definition under our compliance manual of a coordinated scheme. I didn't say fraud, I let the pattern say it. Anti-fraud took it from there. That was a Friday. They sat on it for about 10 days, longer than I wanted. Then things moved fast, in a way I only saw pieces of. Our SIU brought in outside counsel. Outside counsel talked to the Georgia Insurance Commissioner's office. Someone talked to the U.S. Attorney's office for the Northern District. I got asked to sit in a conference room on the 12th floor and walk 2 investigators through my methodology. They were quiet, polite, took notes in yellow legal pads. One of them asked me if I'd ever considered working in forensic accounting. I said I hadn't. The subpoenas went out in June. I didn't see most of what happened next. I only got pieces from the news and from what Doug passed along. 2 of the doctors surrendered their licenses before the board could pull them. 3 more had them revoked at hearings later that year. One of the imaging center owners took a plea. The pain specialist fought it and lost. I don't know what happened to the last one, and I stopped checking after a while. In August, the VP of the analytics group asked me to come to her office. She offered me a senior role on the fraud analytics team, higher band, better tools, a small team of my own. I took it. The strange part, the part I sometimes think about when I'm driving home along 285 in the dark, is that none of those doctors ever had to sit in a room together. As far as anyone could prove, they didn't have to. Somebody had set the loop up years back, and each of them just kept it running, sent the patient down the line, collected the fees, waited for the next one to come back around. The wheel didn't need a driver, it only needed to keep turning. The internship was unpaid, and the coffee machine on my floor had been broken since January, but I still showed up early every day, because working in the missing persons archive at the Hoover Building was the kind of thing you don't get twice. This was March 2017. I was one of 3 interns rotating through the basement records division on Pennsylvania Avenue, and my job was as boring as it sounds. I pulled files, checked reference numbers against the digital registry, flagged anything that had degraded, and put them back on the shelf. The archive smelled like old paper and the industrial dehumidifier that ran in the corner of row H. That hum was constant. You stopped hearing it after about 10 minutes, then remembered it every time you left the room and your ears felt strange in the hallway. I want to be clear that I wasn't looking for anything. Nobody hands an intern a case. What I was doing was a cross-reference project for a supervisor named Ellis, who wanted the pre-2005 paper files matched against the newer digital index, because the old data entry had been done by contractors and was full of typos. It was busy work. I did it with a stack of legal pads and a laptop that didn't have internet access. The first one I noticed was a woman from Reno who went missing in 2003. Her family statement had a line I read twice. She had told her sister she got hired through a job board online, some hiring website, she couldn't remember the name. 2 days later, another file. A guy from Toledo, 2007. Same phrasing almost. His girlfriend told the local field office he'd been excited about a new gig he found on some employment site. When she tried to remember the name, she couldn't. 2 isn't a pattern. I flagged it in my legal pad and kept going. By the end of that week, I had 6. By the middle of the next week, I had 14. 14 cases across 20 years. Different states, different ages, some men, some women, no shared employer, no shared physical description. The only thing that connected them was that every single one, in the weeks before they disappeared, had told a family member or a coworker about a job they'd landed through the same site. Nobody remembered the name of it. In 3 files, someone had written down a URL. All 3 URLs were slightly different. All 3 went to a defunct domain now. I didn't tell Ellis yet. I told myself I wanted to double check. That Friday I stayed after 5. The lights in the archive were on motion sensors, and if you sat still too long, they'd click off in sections, and you'd have to stand up and wave your arms like an idiot to get them back. I walked row K, where 9 of the 14 files should have been. The shelf tags were correct. The barcodes on the shelf edges matched the reference numbers in the registry. The registry said each of the 9 files was on site, checked in, last accessed between 1999 and 2011 depending on the case. The folders were not there, not misfiled. I checked the shelves on either side. I checked the returns cart. I checked the row above and the row below. I pulled the whole section out and looked behind, because sometimes a folder slides down the back of the shelf and lodges against the wall. Nothing. 9 empty spaces where 9 folders should have been, and the plastic dividers between them still standing upright like nothing had ever been there. The other 5 files were where they were supposed to be. I sat on the floor with them in my lap and read each one twice. They were unremarkable in every way except for that single detail about the website. I went home that weekend and didn't sleep well. Not out of fear. It was more like the feeling you get when a song is stuck in your head and you can't finish the melody. I kept trying to remember if I'd seen anything else in the paper margins. A handwritten note, a stamp, anything that might tell me who had pulled those 9 folders. Monday morning, I did what a person is supposed to do. I wrote up a summary. 2 pages, no speculation, just the facts. 14 cases, common detail. 9 files missing from physical archive, but listed as present in the registry. I recommended a formal audit of row K. I signed it and sent it up through the internal request system, addressed to Ellis and CC'd to the records supervisor on the 4th floor. I saved a copy on the network drive I had access to. Ellis stopped by my desk that afternoon. She was in her 50s, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had a way of talking to interns like we were her nephews. She said she'd read it. She said she'd pass it up. She said, and I remember this exactly because it was said in a voice that wasn't quite hers. You did the right thing writing it down. Don't work on it anymore this week. Tuesday and Wednesday I went back to the pre-2005 cross-reference. I did not go near row K. Thursday morning I got an email. It was from an address I didn't recognize inside the Bureau's own domain. The subject line was the reference number I'd used on my request. The body was 3 sentences. The files I had inquired about had been withdrawn from the archive as part of an ongoing investigation. The investigation was classified. The name of the investigation, where it should have appeared in the 2nd sentence, was a black rectangle, not a word covered over. An actual image, a solid black bar embedded in the email. I read it 4 times. I forwarded it to my personal address before I could think about whether that was a bad idea. When I checked my inbox 30 seconds later, the email was gone. Not in trash. Gone. My forwarded copy never arrived at the other address either. That afternoon, Ellis called me into the small conference room by the elevators. There was a man with her I hadn't seen before, in a suit that fit him too well for the basement. He didn't introduce himself. Ellis did the talking. She said my internship was being ended early, administrative reasons, something about a review of the intern program's headcount for the quarter. She was apologetic in the way people are when they've been told to be apologetic. The man in the suit watched my hands the whole time. They walked me up to collect my things. My legal pads were not in my desk. My laptop had been swapped for a different one with a different asset tag. When I signed the exit paperwork, the line that usually says the reason for departure had been pre-filled in a font that didn't match the rest of the form. I still live in DC. I finished my degree that summer at a different program, and I work now for a company that has nothing to do with the government and nothing to do with archives. I don't go near the Hoover building, not because I'm afraid of it, because there's no reason to. The domain names I wrote down on my legal pad are gone from my memory in the specific way things go when you've stopped rehearsing them. I remember the shape of them. One had a hyphen, one ended in .net, but not the words. Sometimes I try to reconstruct them in the shower, and I get close, and then it slips. Once, last October, I was in a bar in Adams Morgan, and I overheard a woman at the next table telling her friend she'd gotten hired somewhere, off a site she couldn't quite remember the name of, some listing site. The friend of a friend had told her about it. I turned around before I could stop myself. She looked at me, and I didn't say anything. What would I have said? I paid my tab, and I left. And on the walk home, I kept thinking about the black rectangle where the name of the investigation should have been, and how neat the edges of it were. I retired in August 2021, and by the first week of September, I was living in a small town in Vermont, maybe 20 miles east of Rutland. Won't say the name. It's the kind of place with one gas station, a diner that closes at 3, and more churches than stoplights. The house was a small green cape on a dead-end road, half an acre, a wooden fence on the east side, and past that fence, my neighbor. His name was Roland, 70-something, thick white hair, always in a plaid flannel, even when it was still warm. First time I met him, I was hauling a box of books out of the U-Haul, and he was already there, leaning on the fence like he'd been waiting. "You must be the new fella," he said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." We shook hands over the fence. He had a good grip for his age. Told me his wife passed in 2018, he had a garden out back, and if I ever needed a hand with the snowblower come winter, he had two. Nothing weird. I went back inside and thought, all right, decent guy. That was the pattern for the first 2 weeks. Every time I went out into the yard, Roland showed up. Didn't matter if I was checking the mailbox or dragging a bag of mulch around back. Within about a minute, he'd be at the fence, coffee mug in hand, ready to talk. At first I figured he was just lonely. Widower, no kids visiting, small town. I'd have been the same in his shoes. Around the 10th day, he asked me something he had no way of knowing. I was raking leaves, and he asked if I still ran, just like that. "You still get out running like you used to?" I stopped. I hadn't run in 4 years, since the knee, and I hadn't said one word about running to him. I laughed it off. Told him no, the knee's shot, and asked why he thought I ran. He said something about my posture, the way I carried myself. Sounded like a compliment. I let it go. 2 days later, he asked if Linda ever came out to visit. Linda was my ex-wife. We split in 2011. I had not said her name in front of Roland. I had not said her name in front of anyone in that town. I remember standing there with the garden hose in my hand, water still running, staring at him. He was smiling like he'd asked me about the weather. I said, "How do you know that name?" He blinked, looked confused for a second. Then he said, "Oh, I thought you'd mentioned her. Maybe I'm mixing you up with somebody." "Getting old, you know how it is." He laughed. I laughed. I turned the hose off and went inside. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I started paying attention. Over the next week, he did it 3 more times. He asked me how long I'd been at Corning. That's where I worked, 31 years, engineer. Never told him. He asked if I still had family back in Elmira. I grew up in Elmira. Never told him that either. Each time he said it like a small remark inside a bigger conversation, and each time when I looked at him, he just kept talking about something else, like he hadn't noticed my face change. I stopped going into the yard. I know how that sounds. 66 years old, retired, and I'm rationing my own backyard because the old man next door keeps knowing things. But that's what I did. I'd look through the kitchen window first. If I saw him out there, I'd wait. My cousin has early Alzheimer's and he says all kinds of stuff he shouldn't know. Maybe Roland was the same. Maybe he'd heard something from the previous owners. Maybe there was a normal explanation and I was being a coward, but I kept thinking about Linda. Nobody in Vermont knew her name. On a Saturday morning in late September, I made coffee, walked outside on purpose, and waited. 90 seconds. Flannel, mug, smile. Morning. Morning, Roland. I let him talk for a minute about the frost coming early. Then I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want a straight answer." He got quiet. Set his mug on the fence rail. "How do you know so much about me? My ex-wife's name, where I worked, where I grew up? I never told you any of that." He looked down at the mug. Then he sighed, and he looked embarrassed, like a kid caught in something small. "Ah, hell," he said. I was hoping that hadn't stuck out. He explained it slowly. His niece, Carrie, worked at the realty office in town, the one I'd bought the house through. When my application came in, she brought a copy over one evening for dinner and showed it to him. Not the whole thing, just the front page. Name, previous address, employment, next of kin. She wanted her uncle to know who was moving in next door since he lived alone and she worried about him. He'd read it twice. Some of it stuck. "I shouldn't have brought that stuff up in conversation," he said. "I just wanted you to feel welcome. Wanted you to feel like somebody around here already knew you. Guess I overshot." I stood there. Honestly, I felt stupid. The whole thing collapsed into something so ordinary, I almost laughed. A lonely old man got handed a piece of paper by his niece and read it too many times. I told him it was all right. Told him I appreciated the honesty. We shook hands over the fence, and I went inside, and I felt lighter than I had in 2 weeks. Around 2 that afternoon, I sat down with a cup of coffee and pulled up the realtor's number on my phone. I don't know why exactly. Part of me just wanted to close the loop. Her name was Denise, nice woman, mid-40s, had sold me the house in about 6 weeks flat. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful. I told her I had a quick question and I wanted to be respectful about it. Asked if it was standard practice, or even legal, for a realtor to share a buyer's application with someone in the neighborhood before the sale closed. A next-door neighbor, say, so they could know who was moving in. There was a pause, short one. Then she said, "Can you tell me why you're asking?" I told her about Roland, about Carrie. About the front page of my application at his kitchen table. The pause after that was longer, long enough that I looked at the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then Denise said, "I don't have a niece." I didn't say anything. She said, "I don't have any nieces. I have 2 nephews, both in Colorado. Neither of them has ever worked in real estate." I asked her, slow, if maybe there was another Carrie at the office, a coworker, anyone. "There's no Carrie here," she said. "There never has been. It's a 4-person office. I'd know." I asked her the question I'd meant to ask in the first place. Is it legal? Is it ever done? To hand a buyer's paperwork to their future neighbor? She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "No." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table with the coffee going cold in front of me, and I looked out the window at the fence. Roland was in his yard, watering a patch of dirt where nothing was growing. He saw me through the glass. He waved. I waved back. I'm writing this from a rental in New Hampshire. Put the Vermont house up 2 weeks ago. My realtor is a man this time, out of Concord, and I filled out the shortest application he would let me get away with. No previous address, no ex-wife listed, no hometown. I don't know how Roland knew any of it. I don't want to know. We stop here, in the moment before things spiral further. Thanks for making the full journey with me tonight. Which thread's going to be your shadow? Tell the comments below. There's so much more waiting to be uncovered. Keep your wits sharp. See you in the next one.